If you want to join me tonight, Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs chapter 14 in the Bible study tonight. Proverbs 14. Now, we're here in Proverbs chapter 14, and I'm going to actually read the end of Proverbs 13 as we get going. Like I said, Proverbs is one of those books that it is not necessarily all a narrative. So we've got to be careful that we don't make too many connections that are not meant to be made. So I'm trying to be a little careful in how I approach this. But what I've seen in Proverbs 13 and 14 is there's an awful lot about training and teaching and things like that. And so what I've done is I've kind of gone through the list and I've pulled out a whole lot of verses that really have the idea of the teaching / training. All right? And again, it is not meant to necessarily be a narrative. There are sections of Proverbs that are very much designed to be a narrative. But the other thing I want you to remember from way, way back is there are various characters that you see show up in the book of Proverbs. And so you might be familiar with these. We talked about it. We said there's the simple man. All right? And the simple man is someone who's just ignorant. They don't know any better. They're just, what you see is what you get. They're just untrained. They're doing dumb things, but it really is not out of any specific evil other than just general evil that we all have. They're ignorant. All right? The simple is someone who they don't know any better, and it says they walk right past the problem and they get punished for it. And again, it's not out of a rebellious heart necessarily. They're just simple. And this is where we all start, and in some ways we all remain here in various facets of our existence. But the idea is we are trying to learn wisdom, we're trying to follow the Lord so that we become less and less simple. And that's what Proverbs is written to do. We also looked at the idea of just generally, you have this character who is just foolish. And we said the foolish man is someone who knows what to do and they're not doing it. And they have some punishments that come along with that. So the simple is someone who just doesn't know any better. They're ignorant, they're naive, whatever word you want to put in there. That's the idea of the simple man. Sometimes he doesn't even know what he doesn't know. All right, we've all been there. I used to joke where when I was taking college classes, the professor would hand out that list and be like, all right, here's all the responsibilities, here's what we're going to go over, any questions? And it's like, I don't even know enough to ask a question right now. Like, what do you mean, do I have any questions? I'm like, I'm so lost, I don't even know what? And that's the idea of simple. Like, I just literally don't know any better. The foolish man, like I said, he knows the truth. He's just not doing it for various reasons. And fool is generally a term for just someone who's not doing the right thing, whether through ignorance or rebellion or whatever. But then there's a specific type of fool that is called the scorner. All right? And so what you kind of see here is on a building level of evil. The simple is someone who's evil, but just because they don't know any better. The foolish person is a general term, which can be applied to any of these. But generally speaking, the foolish person is someone who they're doing the wrong thing. For whatever reason, they're doing the wrong thing, and that needs to be addressed. But by the time you get to a scorner, this is a person who's doing the wrong thing on purpose. They're rebelling. They are openly fighting against what God has for them. A scorner is someone who basically, they're just going to have to be smacked. I mean, that's kind of the idea. A simple man might be warned by watching a scorner get smacked. He might learn from that. A foolish man might learn through various means. But really, the scorner is someone who, they're just slated for destruction unless they get their act together. And that's the building level of instruction that's going to be needed in this case. And the Bible says that if you read Proverbs 1, Proverbs has help for all of these. Because, again, like I said, we don't ever completely grow out of being simple. There's always something else to learn. There's always more about God to learn. But we are meant to say, I don't know, and I'm going to submit to God's teaching on this subject. And for all of these, you then have the ability to become wise. Now, I have not defined wisdom in a long time, but the idea of wisdom is skillful living in God's world. And I want you to remember that because, again, you'll see wisdom coming personified and making fun of people who didn't listen to it. And that comes across as harsh, and that comes across as mean, except for the fact that, simply put, wisdom is the scaffolding God used to build the universe.
Yeah.
So wisdom is just the way universe works. It's just, those are the rules. It would be like me if I jumped off the top of a high building and I get upset at gravity for pulling me toward the earth. It's just the rule of the world. It's just how things work. Gravity did not go out of its way to be mean. Gravity just works.
Yeah.
And so if I choose to say, God, I don't trust your wisdom, I don't trust how you made this world, and I fight against him and I get crushed underneath that wheel,
Yeah.
there's only one person to blame, and it's me.
Right.
Now, if I'm simple, I could say, I didn't know any better. If I'm foolish, I could say, I didn't realize it was going to hurt that bad. But a scorner, they don't really have an excuse. And so you understand what Proverbs is doing is it's saying, we are going to give subtlety to the simple. We're going to give instruction to the foolish. We're going to correct the scorner. And for the wisdom, for the wise person, he's going to become even wiser. And that's why we study Proverbs. So you might get to the point where you go, I don't need this. Like, I already know this stuff. Great. Are you teaching other people it? Are you trying to get them? But honestly, I think a lot of times we're probably still in some of these spots in some of these ways, and we still need growth. And that's why a book like the book of Proverbs is just so rich. Yeah. I'm telling you, there have been times where I've prepared a sermon, and I've been preaching through topics like this, and I realize truths while I'm preaching it. That happens. So we always have more to learn. We always have more to go into. And so that's where I want to kind of lead into this. And so you'll see some instruction passages here in Proverbs 13. And again, we're continuing kind of lesson 2 of 2, as it were, of this idea of the audience of one. Last week, we looked at the idea of mind your own business. We looked at the idea that there are things that you have to take care of. There's things that you have to work on. And that is something that the idea of not envying other people, the idea of not being lazy, the idea of doing the hard work, all of those are business that you have to take care of. We then continued that series this morning with Sunday school, where we looked at Abimelech and Abraham, and we looked at the idea that there are times where you have to deal with a problem. And it might not have been a business that you wanted to deal with. It might have not been something you were comfortable with dealing with, but you got to do it anyway. And so there are times where you focus in on yourself and say, these are things I have to deal with. And then there's other times where you have to take a step back and go, now I've got to get involved. So tonight, I want to look at the idea of taking care of someone else's problem. But again, both of them boil down to, why am I doing this? So there are times where you are going to have to mind your own business, because to honor God properly, only you can deal with that problem. Then there are times where you're going to have to confront, and you're going to have to lead into a bit of a rebuke phase. And you're going to have to do that for the glory of God. And it still comes back to this idea of audience of one. So I'm putting this right up here at the top. I want this to be our focus as we look through this. But again, there are times where we cannot pass the buck off to anyone else. We are going to have to deal with the problem, and it does involve getting involved in other people's lives. So take a look at this. Look at Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. I referenced some of these this morning. I said there's certain situations that we have no choice but to get involved in. This could be the raising of your kids. This could be your marriage. This could be a situation where you're managing a business. You cannot afford to not get involved in some things. So when it comes really to child raising and marriage, you don't have the option not to confront. You don't have the option not to get involved. And so you see here in Proverbs 13, verse 24, it says this, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. Again, so what do you see here? Right off the bat, you see the idea of you need to get involved in your kids' lives. I mean, that's really what this is saying. It's saying you are someone who you cannot afford to say, I'm not going to deal with this. Right. Okay? Now, I realize most of us are out of this phase, but I want us to apply this to even other situations. Because I used the illustration this morning, and I said there are relationships that sometimes we are allowing to fester. And I want you to keep that word in mind, the idea of festering. Because what this passage is doing is this passage is saying you cannot allow a situation you are in charge of to fester. And that wound illustration, I used the illustration of the staph infection I got that one time. And the staph infection got into my bloodstream, and it looked like I had been bitten by a brown recluse. It was nasty, and it was painful, and it was great. But it all started with an individual little scratch that got dirty somehow, and it just took over. And again, people lose body parts over that sometimes. It's nasty. And this idea of a festering relationship is a relationship that you've said, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to put it off. I'm going to put it off. I'm going to put it off. And what Proverbs says is, he that spareth the rod, he that refuses to take care of the problem, he hates his kid. Why? Because he's basically saying, I'm going to let someone else raise him. I'm going to let someone else take care of this problem. I'm going to let someone else solve this issue. I'm not going to spank them. And guess what? Culture is going to take care of it then. Yeah. That's this idea. And it says, but he that loveth him, what? He chastens him. And that word betimes means early. Like right there. All right? And he's like, hey, you take care of that thing. All right? Now again, it's not saying you're getting involved in... I remember growing up, I had a guy I knew who was a busybody. All right? He just was. He came over to my house one time, and my brother had built this really cool Lego set. It had trap doors, had all sorts of things. Well, I didn't want this guy's kids to destroy the Lego set that my brother had built, and so I kept taking it away from them. Well, this guy got upset, and he decided he was going to start raising me for my parents. And so he told on me, told my parents, hey, your son's not being friendly, not letting my kids play with this. And so my dad was like, I'll take care of it. And my dad did. I mean, he definitely took care of it. And he basically said, like, you're going to be friendly. You're not going to be selfish. But then this guy decided he was going to follow up to make sure that my dad was doing his job. So he came to my dad and he's like, so did he get in trouble for that? And my dad had to be like, that's none of your business. And this happened multiple times throughout my life, where this guy would just kind of nose his way into our business to be like, hey, so did you take care of that? And it's like, it's none of your business. Right. And you notice what he's saying here in this passage is he's saying, you take care of the problem, but you don't necessarily have to tell everyone how you took care of the problem. Yeah. Yes, was I being a selfish little kid? Yes, of course I was. Did I have good reasons to be a selfish little kid? Maybe, I don't know. But I was being a selfish little kid. I needed to be punished for that, all right? But my dad didn't need to go tell everyone how he punished me, all right? And look what he says here. He says, as a parent, he that spareth the rod, if you're not going to deal with your kid, you hate him. Take care of it. Now, again, let's say you don't have any little kids. Okay, fine. There are still things that are relationship that you need to take care of. You can't let them fester. This is a problem that you are going to have to confront. But you notice that in this, children are given as a gift from God. They are given as a responsibility from God, and they're your responsibility. They're not someone else's. I'm a teacher. I have dealt with so many children that I kind of wish were orphans, because their parents make my life extremely difficult because their parents refuse to raise their own kids sometimes. At least that's what it feels like. And so what we need to understand is, as a parent, you do not have the option to pass on the responsibility to someone else. It's your job. As a husband or a wife, you don't have the option to not mend your marriage. You can't pass that responsibility off to someone else. You've got to deal with that. As a guy who runs a business or deals with it, whatever, you don't have the option of saying, I'm not going to get involved. It says here, he that spareth his rod. If you have a responsibility and you are not taking care of that responsibility, you hate your son. You hate, okay? So we just have to understand that even beyond just child raising, there are things you don't have the option of saying, not my business. No, actually, that is your business. And so that's one of these passages where we have to look and we have to say, God has given me responsibilities. I need to take care of them. Now, as that conflict arises, though, we've got to deal with it in a way that glorifies our audience of one, in a way that honors God. And that's why we're not abusive and we're not hostile and we're not bitter. And some of that language that comes up as you deal with marriages or child raising, there's some very specific language that arises because there's a right way to do it and a wrong way. And so we have to remember, how has God told me to deal with this problem? So that's the first passage here, and it's right there in Proverbs 13, verse 24. Now, as we hop to Proverbs 14, we should then hop down to verse 28. We dealt with the first half of Proverbs 14 last week. And a lot of those passages we looked at were the idea of mind your own business, make sure you're doing the right thing, make sure you're taking care of your own problems. But here, we're going to see an overlap here with this passage, verse 28 and following. It says, in the multitude of people is the king's honor, but in the want of people is the destruction of the prince. Okay? Now, this seems like a weird passage, and we referenced it last week, but there are times where we just have to understand God has put people underneath us or put people in our circle that we can influence, and we need to be happy about that. The king says here, it says, in the multitude of people is the king's honor. But you've also heard the expression that more money, more problems. Like the more people you have, the more problems you have. Like if you only have one person you ever deal with in your life, you only have one person's problem. But in the multitude of people, you also have a multitude of problems that come with that. And as a way of encouragement, this passage points out that in the multitude of people is the king's honor. So it's a good thing to have multiple people underneath you. But how does that tie into teaching? Be happy if God allows you to have more influence. Be happy if God has opened up those doors and said, I'm going to have you teaching more people. I'm going to have you responsible for more people. Don't be bitter about that. Don't be upset about that fact. Be excited by the fact that you have the ability to train. Now, here's the catch. That honor, that glory, that delight in training needs to come back to say, how am I doing? Who am I pointing them back to? Who am I representing well? That's the idea. And so if you look here in this passage, in the multitude of people is the king's honor, but the want of people is the destruction of the prince. I want you to see another passage here. It's also in Proverbs 14, so you don't have to turn. But look at Proverbs 14, verse 4. Proverbs 14, verse 4. This is my excuse for a messy room. I'm just kidding. But Proverbs 14, verse 4. Look what it says. Where no oxen are, the crib is clean, but much increase is by the strength of the ox. What is this saying? It's saying, if you have a whole lot of oxen, guess what you're also going to have a whole lot of? A whole lot of mess. All right? If you've ever had to clean a stable, you understand one horse can make a big mess. Multiple horses can make even more of a mess. All right? And that, where's that? It's good to have multiple horses, especially if you need them. All right? If you need multiple cows to do a job, you can't settle for just one because you're like, I don't want a big mess. I'm sorry, that to have the delight and power that comes with multiple oxen, you're going to have to deal with the delight of multiple oxen's mess. That's just the way it is. And so if you are teaching, or if you're training, or you're raising, or whatever you're doing, you understand that as you multiply more and more people, the mess is also going to increase. But again, the audience of one, that's a responsibility God's given. Delight in it. It's not fun to muck a stable. Makes your boots dirty. All right? But that's the job of the stable. That's part of the job. It's part of the, if you're a teacher and you're like, yay, I get to grade 400 papers instead of 200 papers. Whoa. But again, God gave you more responsibility. God gave you more privilege. I love this illustration because if you look at Jesus when he starts laying out the talents and he says, I'm going to give this guy 1 and I'm going to give this guy 5 and this guy 10. And then the guy who has 10 and he gets 10 more and he goes, good. Here's some more responsibility. And he gives him another talent and says, here's another one to take care of. He doesn't go, hey, go have a vacation. Good job. No, he goes, good. You were faithful in this. You're going to be faithful in even more. And what he's done is he's basically said, good job. Here's more work. And that's the illustration of God has blessed us with the ability to serve. He's blessed us with the ability to train. We should delight in it, and we should take care of things when they're small. And if we serve well, there are times where God basically says, good, here's more. And we go, okay. But this whole time, our audience of one, we are going to get to the end and go, it's just my reasonable service. I am an unprofitable servant. I wish I could have done more. But you need to be faithful with that which is little. As we keep going through Proverbs 14, look at verse 29. So we've seen that we need to delight in the ability to train. We need to train early, so that way things don't fester and get beyond our control. But look at verse 29. It says, he that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit, he exalteth folly. Okay, so we've seen a few principles here, all right? So first principle we've seen is this idea that when it comes to teaching, when it comes to training, we do it early. We take care of the problems when they're small. We also have a delight in it, all right? And so the idea of delighting in the training means you're going to have more responsibility, more things that are building up, and the frustration that comes with that is going to grow, but you keep your eyes on the one for your strength and your sustainment and all that. But then what we have to remember as we go through this is we have to approach things calmly. Now, that seems weird to say, but look what he says here in this verse. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding. I don't know if you've ever had this. Again, child raising, teaching, whatever. Someone's yelling at you. Your natural instinct, your gut response is to raise the voice and come back with equal measure. Okay, I don't know about you, but in my experience, that has never actually solved the problem. In fact, what the Bible says is a soft answer turneth away wrath. Now, there are times where you might have to add that extra special firm note to your voice to scare the sin out of them. The Bible does teach that. We talked about that when we were going over anger. I said there are times where an angry countenance drives away a backbiting tongue. It doesn't say an angry heart. It says an angry countenance. Put on the scary face, scare away the backbiting tongue. But again, you'll notice what he's saying here is he says, he that is soon angry, he that is just, they're a flash in the pan, they're angry suddenly. You're exalting folly when you do that. So if your method of training is, I'm just going to go all the way to 11, good luck. No, that's not how to train. The Bible says that he that is slow to wrath, actually you're showing your wisdom by being slow to wrath. Why? Because when you are angry, when you're frustrated, you take a step back and you say, I'm delighting in the responsibility God's given me. I'm taking care of problems before they arise, but you know what? In the multitude of the oxen, the crib is an absolute mess. So you're going to have to deal with that mess. But where does it come from? It comes from the audience of one. Who are you training for? Who are you trying to get them to love? Who are you trying to represent well? What do we know about God? He is of great mercy. He is of great compassion. He puts up with a lot of garbage that we sling at him. He is of unbelievable levels of patience. And if we are going to model him, and we are going to imitate him, and we're going to act like him in our training, then we also need to be someone who is not knee-jerk in our reaction. We are slow to wrath, slow to speak, slow to rage. The Bible says that. Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. And so that's why I use this illustration of calmness. Because again, there is a lot of issues. Think about Abraham and Abimelech. A lot of issues that can be solved by addressing something just head on. What did Abraham do? He didn't go around behind Abimelech's back and, oh, he's such a terrible guy, he took my well and blah, blah. No, he just went to Abimelech and went, how come you took my well? And Abimelech's like, I didn't even know. What happened? He's like, you took my well. And he's like, I didn't know. I'll give it back to you. I didn't know. And I find that happens so much where instead of going and dealing with the problem in a calm, loving way, what is it? And it doesn't solve the problem at all. It makes us feel good. And I think I told you the story about the time someone texted me, and they texted me the wrong verse, and the verse was, you know, a foolish son is heaviness to his father. And I was like, what are you saying about my parents? And what they meant to text was, in the multitude of words there lacketh not sin, which I was like, oh, I agree with that one. But they texted me the completely wrong verse. They texted me verse 1 when they meant to text me verse 11. And so when I finally went and talked to them, and I was like, what is up with this? And they're like, oh, that was the wrong verse. I had been festering on that one for weeks. I was like, what is going on? Why are you insulting my parents over this? And then I came to find out, I texted the wrong verse. Oops. And I was like, oh, I agree with you on verse 11. Yeah, that was me. I'm sorry. But don't you dare insult my mama. You know, but what was it? It was the wrong verse. It was a mistake. And the Bible says in Ecclesiastes that take no thought to all the words that are spoken, lest you hear your servant curse thee. And what is the point of that? It's saying there comes a point where you have to stop and go, maybe they didn't mean it. But then the rest of that verse, which is extremely convicting, says, but you also know in your heart that you have done likewise. So what is the verse in Ecclesiastes doing? It's saying, don't take thought to every word you hear someone say about you. Why? Because you're going to make it out that they say things they didn't mean to say. Okay, good. And also, if they did say it and they meant it, you're guilty of it too, so maybe you shouldn't judge. Because how many times have we backbitten someone or badmouthed someone or talked about them behind their back and we're like, but I'm justified in what I did. When they do it to me, that is uncalled for. And so what is Ecclesiastes and Solomon trying to say in that passage? You reap what you sow, for one, but also not everything was meant to be an insult. Don't take it. And that's why we approach this calmly to say, listen, I'm going to be slow to wrath. Take a breath. Don't react right away. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding. But he that is hasty in his spirit, what is he doing? He's exalting folly. Now, to keep going, look at the next verse. So this is where it is kind of nice. These verses all are kind of close to each other. Look at verse 30. It says this, a sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy is the rottenness of the bones. So we're training. We're teaching. We've approached it first. We said, I'm going to deal with the problem early. We're delighting in the idea that we get the privilege of training. We get the ability to have an influence on someone else's life. We're doing it calmly, but also we are not being envious while we do it. We are not, there we go. We are not being envious. We're content with where God has put us. We're content with what God has given us. There will always be someone with more influence. There will be always someone with more privilege, or you think they have it easier, whatever. Look what he says here. A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy is the rottenness of the bones. There are times where we're going to get frustrated because we feel like God has given us a hard row to hoe. We feel like he has laid out all the problems for us and someone else doesn't have any problems. And you'll see that in the Psalms, where he'll say, like, the wicked, they don't struggle like other men. There's no bands in their death. There's all this stuff. And we get envious because we're like, how come God's given me all this stuff to deal with? But he says here, no. Audience of one. I'm serving him. I'm honoring him. I'm waiting for him to come through for me. I am not being envious of other people, wicked or otherwise. Right. Wicked or otherwise. I am going to be content with where God has me. And I might not see it where I'm like, I don't have success like these other people. Who cares? We're not working towards success. We're working toward being faithful to what God has called us. And it might not look like success. Now, on this note, I do want to give a formula. Now, this formula is not original with me, but it's something that I want to keep coming back to. And it's this. We're all going to deal with people. We're all going to deal with people who struggle. We're going to deal with people who are dealing with things. And you've all seen this, and you've seen it in your own life, where you go, I got help, and that didn't seem to work, whatever. And so as we're dealing with people, I want to give you this formula. The first thing is this idea. When we're dealing with people, we have to give them the truth. Just got to give it. Now, you do it in love. So, truth plus love. All right? And so we've got truth and love. And we've got to tell the truth. We've got to tell the truth in love. And automatically we think that will equal change. All right? However, we've all been here where we've told the truth, and we've told the truth in love, and that person does not change. And we go, what's the missing part of this formula? Truth plus love? Well, here's the thing. We've got to be faithful. And there's something to be said about continuing to train and continuing to do the work and having the patience to keep going. And this is where we talked months ago about the law of the harvest. And the law of the harvest with sowing and reaping is simply this. In due season, you will reap what? If you faint not. We are not called to succeed. We are called to be faithful. We are called to serve the Lord in sincerity and truth. And so when we are put in a spot where we have the ability to confront someone, and we confront them with the truth. Okay? It's not just enough that you hit them with the truth. You got to hit them with the truth and do it in love. But it's not a one and done. If you've ever taught, if you've ever raised kids, it's not just I told you once, how come you don't remember? No. It's truth, done in love, but you got to keep faithful at it. And that's how you see the change. But again, where is this? Again, this comes back to the idea, though, that we are remembering the audience of one. Because he is the one who brings the increase. He is the one who can change the heart. And it's our job to faithfully represent him to others. It's our job to faithfully pray for them. It's our job to faithfully present the truth in a loving way, representing Him. And we pray that He brings the change. But we've all been there, where it took years, decades. Sometimes we never saw it because they moved out of our lives and we don't know. But we are called to be faithful. And when we are called to train, we do it before it festers. We delight in it. We do it calmly. We don't do it in a spirit of envy. All right? But let's finish off the rest of this passage. Look at verse 31. He that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker, but he that honoreth him hath mercy on the poor. And so here's the idea. I just saw this come across my feed today, and I heard the story on Tuesday. And I'm going to say it like this. Don't overlook for silly reasons. Okay? What do I mean by this? Well, I just heard it this week. There was a guy who was homeless who showed up at a church in San Francisco. And he was kind of a sketchy fellow, kind of dirty, kind of stinky. He came in, and the pastor welcomed him in, made sure he was there for a good reason, but, checked up on him. And the pastor just started working with this guy. Now, he said for the first little bit of time, he kind of had someone watching just to make sure this guy wasn't just casing the joint, but he just was like, hey, you're welcome to worship with us. You're welcome to come sit with us. You're welcome. James says this. If you've got a rich guy that walks in, give him a good seat. If you've got a poor guy that comes in, give him a good seat. You can't look at the poor guy and go, oh, sit there under my footstool and you'll make a good seat rest. No, he says, no, you treat all these guys equally. Whoever walks in that door, you treat them equally. Now, again, wisdom is going to dictate. You're going to make sure they're not casing the joint or something. But what do? You train them. You disciple them. You take care of them. And that's why he says here in this passage, if you reproach the poor, you're despising their maker. So you don't overlook training just because you look at someone and go, they could never amount to anything. No, that person, to follow up on the story, 3 years later, he's actually preaching from the pulpit of that church. And he preached for the first time, I believe it was today. And he's going on to seminary. And so here's a guy who came in homeless and dirty and just kind of down on his luck. And the church said, hey, welcome in. Don't know why you're here, but you're welcome. And they worked with him, and they trained him. And guess what? He's now going off to seminary. It's awesome. And you have that ability because, you see this with Jesus where he says, go out into the highways and byways and compel them to come in. He's like, I don't care. Just bring them in. And again, we're wise and we have systems set up to make sure we can actually train people properly. And there are some things that we're like, I don't have experience in that. I don't know how I can help. Okay. We're not opening up a halfway house in the back pantry and being like, sure, pull up a cot and sleep. No, we're not equipped for that. But as a church, we're equipped for discipleship. And we're equipped to say, let's see people get saved and let's train them and see what God will do with them. And we have that where we say, hey, I'm just going to, what God plops in my plate, I'm going to delight in it, and I'm going to welcome it. And you'll see that here where he says, he that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker, but he that honoreth them hath mercy on the poor. You then see verse 32. It says this, the wicked is driven away in his wickedness, but the righteous has hope in his death. And so again, you see this idea that we are doing what we can to restore fellowship between people and their God. We're introducing them to their God. And again, right now, they're enemies. And we are trying to introduce them to Christ and say, this is how you can have deliverance. It does not come through us, does not come through our own wisdom. It comes through faithfulness and pointing them back to Christ. But as we wrap up this study, look at the last few verses. And it says this, wisdom resteth in the heart of him that hath understanding. See, a very, very similar to what it says in verse 29. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding. So what's wisdom going to do? It's going to help you deal with that issue. But it says, but that which is the midst of fools is made known. Okay, what is that? A fool's going to talk, and you'll very quickly know what's inside the heart of a fool. But wisdom is there, an understanding heart, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, okay, let me train you. Let me work. Let me chip off those edges. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling it with as much love as I possibly can. and I'm giving it the time to work. But what is he saying? He's saying you're going to run into people, and that little statement there, that which is in the midst of fools is made known. It's going to let you know. The fool, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And a fool is known by his multitude of words. Don't take it all personally. You train, you put up with the stupid statements. We all know that. We all know how that is. And I've been there, and I've walked away from a conversation, and I've been, oh, I was so stupid. I was trying to impress that person, and I said this and this. And they overlooked it, and I appreciate the fact that they overlooked it. But man, and what do? You have those moments where you go, my words were stupid. Okay, I'm so thankful that I had so many people through my life who put up with my stupid words and continued to teach. I remember the amount of work that my pastor put in on my one sermon that I preached, and it was 9 minutes long and super fast and super bad, but he took the time to read over my notes and give feedback, and he gave me an opportunity to preach. And I look at that and I say, all right, so Pastor Richard Anderson, who has gone to be with the Lord about 20 years ago, he's at fault for this. But you look and you say, here is a man who said, I'm going to invite you into my house on Monday nights, and I'm going to sit down with a group of men, and I'm just going to teach them how to preach. And I'm going to let you preach from the pulpit, and I'm going to work with you, and I'm just going to, and then, you know what, you're stupid. You say dumb things sometimes. But he worked with me. And he let me intern for a summer, and he just sent me out on the streets to go door to door. And I still remember not even knowing how to present the plan of salvation and stumbling my way through it. But he was like, hey, I'm going to let you serve in these ways. And a foolish person is going to let you know sometimes. And you just say, you know what? Let's redirect that over here. And let's keep working with you. And I'm going to be patient. And you never know what influence that will have on the future. And that guy that walks in that you're like, oh boy, it's this guy again. Okay. We don't know what God will do. And so we are at times going to have to confront. There are times where we are going to have to get, as Peter and Paul did, they got in each other's face because of doctrinal issues or other things that are going wrong. They had to address it. But you do it in love. You do it with truthfulness. You delight in the fact that God has given you that ability to have that influence. And you look to the audience of one and say, I'm doing this for his honor and glory. I'm not doing this to build my empire. I'm not doing this for me. Otherwise, I would pick a much more relaxing job than teaching people. But that's not what God's called us to do. He's called us to make disciples. He's called us to see people get saved. And he's called us to do some of the uncomfortable work, which sometimes involves getting in business we don't want to get involved in. But this is some of the principles that we can apply. As we wrap it up, we also, as you get to verse 34, it says this, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. What is this? We're thinking big. We're thinking big picture. A lot of people will scream and cry and beg for revival. How does a revival happen? One person at a time. Revival is not just this magic thing where we snap our fingers and suddenly everybody wants to do the right thing. Revival starts here with me saying, I'm in sin and I need to make this right. And now I'm free of that sin, and now I can deal with that person who I see struggling with the same sin I struggled with. Because I struggle with it, I know how to help them because I know what they're going through, and now I can patiently help them along. And if they refuse, then I say, okay, well, maybe I can find someone else to help. And it starts to spread because we say, listen, I know what you're going through. I know what you're struggling with. Let me help you. Hey, do you know Christ as your Savior? Hey, and what does that do? We start then dealing with all these individual people, and guess what? Over time, it exalts a city, it exalts a state, exalts a country. But it says, but what is it? Sin is a reproach to anyone. And so we think big, we think nationally. And so as we get to train, God may open the doors wide and say, yes, I'm going to give you more. And we go, or he might say, no, I'm just this is all the influence I'm going to let you have, but you don't know what that impact's going to be long term. And so we think nationally, we think big. And then we wrap it up with verse 35, and this is what we are pointing them to. The king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him that causeth shame. And so how do we wrap this up? We are pointing people toward wisdom. We are pointing people toward the Lord. We're pointing them toward him to say, this is the answer. As Ecclesiastes wraps up, it says, of the making of many books there is no end, and much study is the weariness of the flesh. But by these my son be admonished. And what Solomon's doing there is he's saying, at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, be admonished by the words I put down. You're going to find no shortage of people with no shortage of self-help and psychological mumbo, whatever. You need to come back to the words of wisdom that have been preserved for us. Those are the ones we build our life on. And we're pointing people back to that wisdom. We're thinking big, and we train. But again, all of it comes back to that audience of one to say, he is the one we're doing it for. He is the one whose strength we're doing it by. And his glory is the thing we're seeking. All right. As we wrap that up, again, we might deal a little bit more with some kind of boots on the ground, practical, like what do we think through as we're doing this. But again, I wanted to take the two sides of the coin. One is you got some business that you need to take care of yourself. Don't be a busybody. But this is the other side of that coin, where God does bring you into people's lives and he puts you in a spot where you can have an influence. Don't neglect that influence. Put the two sermons together. It'll make a complete picture. But I do want to open it up. Questions and comments tonight. And Dave is coming around with the microphone, so give him just a moment to throw it at you before you start talking. Questions or comments tonight? Michael.
I just wanted to make Dave run across the room. I'm no Bible scholar, so I kind of have a hard time remembering which verse. But, Jesus was talking about, you gave me food when I was hungry, and you clothed me when I was naked.
Yep.
And they said, well, when did we do that? So we're really talking about, pretty much the same thing, that all of these persons that come along in their lives, all of us, and ones that are wiser than us, we all need that help, and you don't know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
You just don't know, and sometimes it's a little frustrating because you say, well, I'm trying to do my very best, but they're not even learning,
Yeah.
They're not anything. But I know this, that when I walked into a good gospel preaching church for the first time, it changed everything.
Yeah.
It changed everything, and nobody knew who I was. They had no idea, not at all.
Yeah. So Jesus says it like that. He says, if you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. Ecclesiastes 11 is going to put it this way. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree fall toward the south or to the north, in the place where it falleth, there it shall be. And it says, he that observeth the winds shall not sow. He that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. So he's saying you need to step out and you need to do some of these things, whether you like it or not, whether you have confidence in it or not, serve the Lord. But look what he says here. It says, as thou knowest not the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that was child, so thou knowest not all the works that God who maketh all. In the morning sow thy seed, in the evening withhold not thine hand, for thou knowest not whether this shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they shall both be alike good. And he's saying, hey, you serve the Lord, you leave the difference up to God, but do it unto the least of these, my brethren, and you let God bring the increase. And I, like you said, we serve those who come into the church. We serve those whether we know them or not, and you have no idea the impact that's going to have going forward. That's what Ecclesiastes 11 is trying to teach there. Other questions or comments?
We have someone here this morning, but I'm glad that Mike was tried to be friendly with him. But in my case, I'm scared. So,
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know how to react.
Yeah.
And maybe men to men and women to women.
Yeah, so on that note, that's a really good question. So let's say you're not an extrovert, which I'm not. I'm not. I'm one of those guys who I'm like, I am perfectly content being lost in the middle of the woods. So what do you do in that case? I think this is where someone like an usher, they meet someone at the door, say, oh, you are such and such. You have this similarity. let me pair you up with someone in the church who has that similarity. I'll tell you where this worked. You guys might remember Desiree. She's the one we had the funeral for a few months back. She came in. I found out, oh, you came out of a Catholic background. This is your story. I found someone in the church that was same background. I said, you guys are now friends. Let me connect the two of you together. And that could be a nationality thing. I mean, we're a very multinational church. You're going to have no shortage of anyone who walks in that door. We probably have someone of that nationality here in the church. And you can just go, whoop, there you go. And now suddenly you're pairing with homeland discussion. Or it might be oh, you have this thing? Hey, you're interested in that obscure thing. Now you have a conversation piece. And that's where I think the ushers and the guys who are kind of meeting people at the door, they have a good responsibility to say, I know someone so-and-so who you guys could have a conversation. And you're pairing them up. And that way it's not just generally like random stranger, go sit over here in the corner. And that allows connections that now it goes, that person. Now some of us, we have the ability to figure out on our own, like, oh, you have that random obscure interest? I have that random obscure interest. Okay, some of us are just more natural at that than others. Some of us, we're like little snails. We don't come out of our shell unless we absolutely have to. And then we start bubbling. If you know about snails, you know what that means. All right, any other questions or comments? Teresa.
So my husband and I were discussing earlier about I wanted to go find like a woman on the street before I came here. And his concern was, like, oh, a woman could, do something bad to you and you're all alone.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, I don't know, I'm not fearful. And I know that's a real concern. But
Yeah.
we wanted to ask you, is that appropriate? Because I would love to just go find some, a woman, not a man, but a woman, and just be like, hey, you want to come to church?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I'll do that, but.
And that's where, so the biblical pattern we see with like the disciples is Jesus does send them out 2 by 2. So I think there's something to be said about that. I'm not sure if there was a significance for why he chose 2 by 2. I'm not. There is, but I don't know if there was some other cultural reason. Because again, that was a time period where things were a little safer. But the 2 by 2, practically though, yeah, the accountability, the prayer, I've told you the story about me at the Mormon temple where Deb and I were there and I was trying to talk and my brain completely shut down and she provided all of the necessary resources. And so I was the conversation and she was all the spiritual stuff because she remembered it and I didn't. That was a benefit of having 2 of us there, so she could fill in my gap. But I've definitely had conversations, out in front of Walmart or somewhere where she went on with the kids and I just sat there and had a conversation. Again, but the general pattern, biblically speaking, does seem to be 2. Now that could be a husband and wife, that could be 2 ladies, 2 men. The Bible also is going to say things like, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Some of the application of that would be, we do trust the Lord, but just as Jesus wasn't about to jump off the temple to prove a point, we don't intentionally put ourselves in positions of danger just to be like, well, God's going to deliver me, right? Well, he might, or he might not. And so we've got to do things God's way and not, so to speak, put him to the test. So I don't know if that answers your question or if you have a follow-up.
Passing out tracts.
Yeah.
I mean, because a lot of times it's just me.
Yeah.
So I want to go almost like on a, like so often.
Yeah.
And it's just me. So, I mean, I'm just by myself and passing out the tracts. But I'm thinking like, rather if it's me alone in the car driving them here, it's different. Right?
Yeah. And I think the other wisdom that comes into play here too is God has put you guys together as a pair. And so there is a level of even with the husband-wife relationship, the husband's still going to say things to the wife, and the wife is going to have to defer to the husband. So in some cases like that, you'd have to say, hey, I'll defer, and it actually might be more beneficial for both of you to pick them up. And, so there's some of those things that would play in. So the biblical pattern a lot of times is 2. But even if you were to pick someone up, you're always kind of deferring to your authority. And so
Yes,
there would
okay.
be things that I couldn't do because I have various government authorities that say you can't do that. I can't just be like, well, phooey on you, government. I'm going to do whatever, So we do have to kind of act within the authority structure that God's given to us. So if I see a store that says no soliciting, I can't go, I'm on a mission from God. I'm going to solicit anyway. I do have to defer to what that store requests, whether I like it or not. And so that would be kind of how it would even limit us as much as we would hate to. So
Just real quick, what if the other person, which he's concerned about the danger, but if someone else, a different couple, and they say, yes, you could go do
Yep.
that.
yeah. So you are bound to your husband. He's bound. And so other people could do something completely different because they might not have that same.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, because the Bible it did say that they were going 2 by 2.
Yeah.
So would it be disobedient to God if you didn't go, by 2, even
Yeah.
though your other person
The Bible
is
doesn't
okay with it?
command 2 by 2.
Yeah.
So
okay,
the
so wouldn't it be
the
disobedient?
pattern of wisdom would say, but Philip, God literally abducts Philip, drops him in the middle of the desert next to the eunuch's chariot, and Philip by himself goes up to the eunuch and talks, and then God grabs him, teleports him wherever he teleports him. Philip's by himself, and Philip is this evangelist. So we don't know if Philip was with someone and God just was like, I'm just going to grab you, or if Philip was just by himself doing his thing and God said, but in that case, Philip was all by himself. But Paul tended to travel with a group, several other people did. And there's wisdom to it, whether it's a requirement or not. Just
It's the good example. Jesus said, be about our Father's business. And, in any business, I don't want to bring, make it sound like a worldly thing, but, safety first. When I was in South Africa, I was there for about a year. I was working on a missionary ship as a welder. And they told us, you have to go out. If you have to go out, you have to go out with 2 to 3 people. That was, or even more.
Yeah.
And one day I violated that. And the next thing you know, I had a knife to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
I was just like, okay, I'm going to follow directions. And yes, the Lord was with me because I feel like that was a miracle because these guys that had the knife, it was almost like they got scared of something and they ran. And I'm looking around me, I'm like, I don't see anything. And, who knows, it could have been an angel. But the point I'm making, like as you said, we don't want to tempt God, we don't want to tempt, And anyway, but yeah, I think safety first, any ministry you do.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah. No, and I'd agree with you. My point was, we can see a pattern in Scripture. It's not a promise. It's not a command. It's just a pattern that we would be wise to follow. But I come back to, we do have to obey the government. We have to obey husbands. We have to obey various other, we can't go freelance. That's not what God's asked us to do. So put together kind of the whole day's worth of sermons, and you'll kind of start to see the whole picture. Because we do have that temptation to bring it back, where we do sometimes get tempted to do things for God's glory, but we're doing it in a way He didn't ask us to. Where Satan was trying to appeal to Jesus's, oh, you're a Messiah, so let's do it this way. And he says, no, no. And so we do have to at times say, listen, God has put this authority structure in my life. I don't like it, don't agree with it. I'm going to submit to it because, again, I'm doing it for Him. I'm not doing it to whatever. And so I'm going to have to do it His way, whether I like it or not. He's put limits. And some of these limits are physical limits. Some of these limits are relationship limits. Whatever. And there are limits God puts on us, and we just have to be content to live within the limits God's put. Any other final questions or comments as we wrap up tonight? Okay? So, again, we've seen kind of that idea of this. This is conflict where we have to get involved in other people's lives, and we should delight in it. But again, we're not doing the busybody thing. And last week we saw the idea of there are issues that you just got to take.